A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Sometimes conversations around religious freedom, you're wondering, where do I make a contribution? Well, interested in hearing your heartbeat today as we talk about some of the issues that are going on in Australia, and we might get a focus on some states. That doesn't mean that every state and territory isn't grappling with some of the issues we'll talk about over this next hour. It is a serious conversation to have. Some of the advancing threats to religious freedom. That really means a sense of the freedoms of every Australian diminishing. Well, our special guest today says denominations, churches, and everyday believers like you and I need to prepare to push back against some of the most dangerous laws in the country. The freedoms of every Australian are being eroded, and there are some significant battles that are looming for places like Victoria and New South Wales in particular. Well, in this hour, we're going to talk about cults and coercive control in Victoria. We'll touch on euthanasia or voluntary assisted dying, issues there in Victoria, but also New South Wales. And an update today on a federal petition for religious discrimination bill. There's been movements towards a religious discrimination bill, hasn't there? But both sides haven't agreed. We'll talk about that with Mike Southon, who is Executive Director of Freedom for Faith, a Christian legal think tank that exists to see religious freedom protected and promoted in Australia. Mike Southon, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be back.
Hey, Mike, let's start with Victoria, shall we? Because there's been an inquiry that's ongoing and doesn't deliver a final report until a little bit later next year. But cults and coercive control, what are we talking about here with what's going on in Victoria?
Well, the parliamentary inquiry says that it's trying to see how true cults, really small, coercive religious groups and other fringe groups that aren't religious, how they recruit people, how people can get out of them. But there's real concern what their definition of a cult really is.
Yes, and in fact, there's controversy, isn't there, even within Christian circles, how we identify cults, and you might have your idea around that, I might have my idea, and we'll contribute some thoughts around those sorts of things. But when you've got a government that is quite secularised, isn't interested in Christian things, doesn't have the same sort of criteria that we might measure who's got a right doctrine and who might be a cult, we're in sort of murky waters, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you asked me, my definition of a cult, obviously, is any religious group who doesn't agree with me. That's a good definition of a cult.
And that's what the cults will say about you.
Absolutely. And Freedom for Faith, we work with a large range of big and small churches, some who don't agree with each other. But the point is that we all need the ability to say what we believe, to teach what we believe, and live according to what we believe. Now, of course, communities, all sorts of communities where there are people with authority, sometimes they misuse that authority. And we have seen some terrible, terrible things being committed by people in churches, but we've seen terrible things committed by politicians or by the military, or there's every community has people abusing power. That's not what makes you a cult. And that's one of the biggest concerns we have, is if the Victorian inquiry starts saying, well, we've seen some bad things in this community, so therefore it's a cult, then look, YMCA has had its checkered past. Everyone's had their checkered past. So we are actually really encouraging the government, don't try and define a cult. Don't say this is a category of organisation that we've decided is bad and we're going to treat them as bad. Instead, just focus on effectively finding and prosecuting people who are breaking existing laws. If people are using coercive control, find them. If people are using sexual assault and harassment within a community, let's find them, let's prosecute them. But the word cult is basically impossible to define.
Okay, so there are laws of the land, and what I can hear you say is you want governments to enforce the laws that will protect people from the sorts of coercive control that might come from any group, any organisation. But as soon as you start to then begin to define what a cult is, if you're in government and in power, you might well be singling out particular groups. And while we might all be able to name what one cult is or another, the government might actually bring in all of the Christian churches and say, hey, these are all cults too. Is this where you think you're going with this? This is why it's dangerous, because in the wrong hands, this sort of power can be very, very damaging.
Yeah, that's what's really dangerous about being able to define a faith group as a cult and then somehow control them. I mean, we've seen these laws with outlaw bikie gangs. And then in New South Wales, there are laws to clamp down on outlaw bikie gangs just by declaring them to be illegal. Now, imagine being able to do that to a church and just say, this church, this faith community, it's illegal. We can now clamp down on it. That's the real danger. And we've seen in the guidance note that the inquiry has, it starts with a definition of cult and saying, we're not trying to police people's behaviour, but we're looking for these high control coercive groups. Okay, fair enough. But then they've got this list of what are the known recruitment methods of cults. And this list, some of these things are actually quite deceptive and bad behaviour. But a number of the points on this list are things that regular churches do. In the list is inviting people to a free seminar and workshop. Another thing on the list is offering transformation or salvation. Another thing on the list is peer recruitment, training people to go and teach to their friends and recruit their friends to the faith. These are things that every church does. Every church, runs these welcome days that people can come to come and make Christmas cookies and hear about Jesus and bring your friends. So where do you draw the line? When is a organisation, a faith, a community who wants to reach out, believes that we have got the one way to Jesus, the one way to God, and you need to know Jesus to be saved? And we're going to go out and tell people about that. When does that become a cult? It's very hard to define in law.
Yes, and you know what? This is such a diverse issue, the way we think about that, because anyone who's done some study at all in areas of theology, you want to find the contrast to what you're being taught as being orthodox, and you're actually then creating what is true, what is real, and that might come back to ecumenical creeds that you might have understood as being, those things that we dogmatically stand by. But when we're talking about coercive mind control practices and things that break the law, what we're talking about is perhaps two different things. We are wanting, Mike, here, for people to be able to think and assess and be critical in the way that they think about the things that they believe, and sometimes there's a process in learning that. Sometimes people are into wrong thought and wrong practice before they get things right. Any thoughts here on how laws might disrupt that process that people are going through as they get their thinking right?
Well, I just don't think it's the space for law. I don't think that's the space that government should be defining whether you're believing or not believing the right thing. And there are plenty of faiths out there who teach things that I absolutely abhor. Look, there are all sorts of there are political parties out there that teach things that I completely disagree with. It's not our job to say, you believe something that I really hate, I'm going to shut you down. It's our job to say, if you believe something that I really hate, well, I'm going to use the public space to disagree with you. I'm going to argue with you. We're going to, and hopefully, under God, the truth will win. I mean, I should get rid of the word hopefully, because I believe God is in complete control. And that when we have freedom to debate the truth of reality, when we have freedom to debate the gospel, the truth will win.
So what does it say then about governments? They're talking about legislating cults and this coercive behaviours. Is there a motive in government that we ought to be concerned about here?
I think we need to be careful about this inquiry, because the inquiry hasn't said that they're trying to legislate. The inquiry has said what they're trying to do is find out what's going on and what can be done. And to their credit, a number of things that the inquiry has been talking about has been education rather than legislation. Other MPs who are sitting on the inquiry are asking questions about, can we legislate this? Can we control this? So I'm not normally somebody to give a lot of leeway or credit to the Victorian government. They don't have a strong track record of protecting religious freedom. But I'm giving this inquiry at the moment a little bit of a wait and see. We are engaging with them very heavily and saying, you can't legislate this. We're hearing back from them. There's a realization that trying to legislate the definition of a cult is possibly more complicated than they can handle and will cause more problems than it will solve. And so we're actually hopeful that we can steer the inquiry to making a wise decision and saying, let's educate people on how to avoid getting wrapped up in cults. Let's educate communities about how we can not use the power that we have in a bad way, but don't legislate and try and define what a cult is.
You know, Mike, cut to the chase here, because when we're talking about religious freedom, there'll be some who are saying, well, what's the connection here? Tell me straight, shoot from the hip here. Are we talking about the sorts of things that we've had discussions about now over a number of years, where conversion therapy practices are criminalising Christians who will even do things like pray for people who might come with an unwanted same-sex attraction? I mean, these sorts of things, when you talk conversion therapy, does this sort of idea about an inquiry into cults and coercive practices, does it sort of relate to where government might have been moving around outlawing church practices? Is this where we're at?
Absolutely. That's our concern. Our concern is that it has the potential to go that direction. To be fair, the inquiry has the potential to go in a very sensible direction, but it really does have the possibility of going into this space where anybody who they decide is coercive, anyone who decide they is harmful could somehow be limited or controlled by the government. And for example, when this inquiry first came out, the ABC ran a opinion piece, which was called "All to Jesus I Surrender. When coercion is taken out of religion, what do we have left?" And they basically argue that Christianity is, by necessity, coercive. And so the quote is, "Surely the argument that one must give over one's life and soul to avoid damnation is coercive by nature." So this is what some of the people submitting to the inquiry have been saying, that any religion that says you've got to follow Jesus or you'll be suffering eternal consequences, any religion that teaches that is coercive by nature and is therefore a cult. Now, I'm not seeing the inquiry at the moment picking up that argument at this point in time, but it's a real fear and it's a real potential that the inquiry could go in that direction, which is why we're working very, very hard to engage with them to try and help them make some wise decisions.
And very quickly, Mike, because we're about to go to a break, the way that we respond, we're hearing this, we know it's complicated, there's all sorts of thinking that can go astray. What do you want Christian believers to do to be able to defend religious freedom?
Right now, the very best thing we can do is to pray. The inquiry is still hearing testimony. It's still finding its way through what it's actually going to think about cults and fringe groups. So we really need to pray for them. We need God working on them and with them. Over time, as weeks come, as the inquiry reports, we may start seeing them recommending some bad legislative decisions. That's when we need to become really politically active, and we will need to be writing to our MPs. We need to be talking with the government. We need to be telling them, don't restrict our religious freedom. Under God, hopefully we can avoid this. So please pray for us as we engage with the government, but keep in touch. Follow us at freedomforfaith.org.au, see what's going on, and we can help you engage with the government if we need to.
Life, culture, and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
Very quickly, a text from Elizabeth in Taree, Mike, who says that's exactly what the CCP does in China. The Chinese Communist Party says everything they don't like is a cult. Are we heading in that direction? Very quickly, because we want to move on, but quick thought for Elizabeth?
Well, yeah, that's exactly what the CCP does. And it's also what, for fear of using the reference, Nazi Germany defined Judaism as a cult. Defining groups as cults is actually the first step to really, really serious oppression, which is why we need to make sure that that's not the pathway the Victorian government take. Completely agree.
Okay, let's pick up on another issue that's going on, and a little bit of focus to New South Wales. They've got issues, I think, in Victoria around VAD, or euthanasia, as we'll often refer to it. But in New South Wales, there's members of the upper house there in New South Wales. They've been receiving hundreds of emails. What are they hearing these protests and these emails about? What's going on, in a nutshell, in New South Wales, Mike?
Well, currently in New South Wales, if you're a faith-based aged care facility, retirement village, etc., you are forced to allow VAD, so euthanasia, to happen on your property. If somebody in your residential village wants to, take their own life with VAD, then you cannot tell them to please go and do that somewhere else. Now, the amendment that's being brought to the upper house at the moment in New South Wales would allow faith-based providers to say, okay, I'm sorry, but if what you're going to do is take your life, which is against our faith, we're just asking you to do it somewhere else. That's all that the amendment would allow. That's already what hospitals are allowed to do in New South Wales, but not retirement villages.
Okay, so when we're talking hospitals and retirement villages, aged care facilities, some of those are, in fact, you might even say most of those have Christian roots, Christian foundations. Are they under the same obligations that government is trying to, we're talking coercion here, are they government coercively expecting, toe the line here?
Yes. So, and we've got, and some of our aged care facilities are sort of religious and don't really mind, but a number of them are real Christian communities who are built on a strong Christian faith, and they just don't want this sort of thing happening in their community and affecting their community. And at the moment, they are forced to allow a resident to have VAD happen in their home, on their property, in that community.
And as Christian believers, when we say we're made in the image and likeness of God, we don't have that right to be able to even make that offer for voluntary assisted dying. I mean, there are processes, obviously, at end-of-life care, but this goes way beyond that and creates opportunity for really a death cult to be birthed in our hospitals and aged care. I mean, we're talking cults here. This is a little bit of an alignment that not necessarily in the way we'd ordinarily approach this, but this is the way things are moving, Mike. And somehow or other, if you don't stand up and be counted, you might be in for a very, very difficult time ahead, because lives will be taken in a way that we might not think is right.
Yeah, totally. We see this trend of something which our society thinks is bad, like suicide, euthanasia. Then suddenly the government says, no, it's now legal. And then later on, the government says it's not only legal, you can't get in the way of it. It's almost mandatory. So I personally have got very strong views on the value of life and whether we should be taking our own lives. But regardless, if the government's going to make VAD legal, they shouldn't also force it onto Christian communities and say, you're a retirement village founded on Christian faith, you have to allow this in your premises. That's going a step too far. That's going from everyone's free to make their own choice to we're now going to tell these crazy religious people that they're not allowed to believe this stuff anymore.
Okay, this is the essence, isn't it, of what religious freedom is, that some have a right to choose because they don't believe the same things. When you are coerced and forced into a particular behaviour, here you have government telling you what you're allowed to believe. That's where this sort of, the heart of understanding religious freedom is all about, isn't it? Governments dictating what you should believe.
Yes, and what you can do in your communities.
Okay, let's squeeze in a quick telephone call. Adam is in Marysville in Victoria. Hey, Adam, welcome along.
Hey, Neil. Hey. Well, first of all, I'm Victorian, and it sounds like that I've done a fair bit of study into cults and stuff and religions, and one of the traits of cults is they're started by false prophets, and also they point you away from Jesus rather than to Jesus. So I just feel like living in Victoria in that Dan Andrews are now just in and are behaving like false prophets and cult leaders themselves.
Okay. Adam, good thought there, coming close to news, but Mike, when you've got the government that behaves like a cult leader, this is the shoe on the other foot here. Thoughts here for Adam?
Oh yeah, I mean the conversion therapy legislation and other things that the Victorian government has done have shown that they really are acting in a quite anti-faith way. Are they a cult? Well, caucus solidarity means that they have to vote a certain way. So I don't know. You decide.
Adam, you think the Victorian government is a cult?
It sounds like it to me. They're trying to push us in this direction with no choice to choose otherwise, and that's what some cults do.
Mike, before we take any further steps forward for these conversations, emotions can run hot, can't they, when we're talking about the issues that we are today, and when you start to grapple with the idea of religious freedom and start to realise, wait a minute, yes, religious freedom is under threat, you can get emotional about that. But the cults and coercive control inquiry, it is just an inquiry. So give us your insights here into how emotive, how excited you might be about participating in all of this.
Yes, well, the thing about an inquiry is it's got potential to be either really good or really, really terrible, and it's impossible to know which way it's going to go. I wouldn't say the government is planning to do this or the government is planning to do that, because we really don't know. What we really need to do right now is spend a lot of effort just giving the best information to the inquiry so they can realise this is what they can do, this is what would be really stupid to do, and pray for them. Pray for them really hard that they make some wise decisions.
This vote on VAD, voluntary assisted dying, and the focus on what's going on in New South Wales, there's a vote coming in a couple of weeks. What's the timing on what the New South Wales Parliament is looking at here?
Yeah, so this amendment, which would allow faith-based retirement villages to not have VAD on their property. So this is an amendment we want to pass. It's been all MPs of all parties have been given a conscience vote, and we actually know that there are MLCs that it's going into the upper house who are supportive. We've got Labor, we've got Liberal, and we've got Independents who are all saying, no, we're supportive of this amendment. If it was likely to come to vote the next time the Legislative Council is sitting, which is in a couple of weeks' time. We can't guarantee it. We never know what their timetable is going to be, but we're expecting the vote to be in about 3 weeks' time. This gives us 3 weeks to talk to all our MLCs, particularly the ones who are undecided, and send them an email and say, this is really important. It's a very small change, but it would be very, very valuable for our faith-based retirement villages and for our Christian communities. Okay,
so there is an amendment. You want it to pass, and
yes.
An amendment that simply allows faith-based residential aged care to decline to have the administration of VAD drugs occur on their property. Fairly straightforward.
Correct.
And so this is a time, there's a call to action here, because seriously, lives are at risk and morality is at risk. So there is a call to action. What do you want people to do specifically? And I'll reinforce this as we go towards the end of our conversation here, but a little bit of action can go a long way if it's done today. What's the specific thing you'd like people to do, Mike?
We want you to go to the website, contactyourmp.org.au, which will give you a guide to writing to the New South Wales MLCs. This is if you are a New South Wales resident. If you live outside the rest of the country, let New South Wales fight its fight. Contactyourmp.org.au, and it will give you the whole guide and make it really easy to write to the MLCs. Now, this is especially important if you're in the regions, if you're in the country, if you're outside of Sydney, because we need Nationals to be voting for this amendment. We haven't heard which way the Nationals are going to be breaking. We really want to be convincing them to stand up for faith communities.
Time to contact your MP. Hey, taking calls 1800 316 316. Send us a text 0447 488 316. Some text coming through, Mike, from Karen. What about all the medical, social and good relief that Christian organisations do? Australia would fall over if they did not have help from these Christian organisations and selfless work that they do. Believers are too passive, trying to be a Mr. and Mrs. Nice Guys, but government and big pharmacy is about profit and control. A quick response for Karen?
Oh, totally. Christians have been way too passive, but we can be active and still nice. Writing a polite letter to your MP but telling them, I'm really concerned about this and this will affect my vote. That's both still nice and polite and Christian, but it's very effective. We can be active and still Christ-like.
Taking calls 1800 316 316. Let's take a call, an anonymous call from Semaphore. Hello, anonymous caller. Welcome along.
Oh dear, I think that I asked. Yes, it was anonymous in this call, but I just have a few things to say. That I have been involved with pretty well violence all my life of all kinds. I was a Lifeline counsellor. I also have studied government best practice, and I have very sick people in my family we've been involved in the law system and the legal rights and our freedoms in this country. And I see a lot of erosion for a long time. I'm 83. And it's from my early childhood. I see that anybody that is controlling others is coercion. And I see that unions in the past have been involved with all of that. And I watched very carefully leadership because that's what my studies brought me through. And we should look at all leadership and look at what they believe in and who is leading us where we're going. And that is all I will say, because I have I'm sure, haven't been officially diagnosed, but I am. They would say I'm a mental case. I am not, and I have been told this, but I see Jesus leading me through my whole 83 years, from a child through the courts, and being told by people we should fight this within the legal system, which we did, and I won't say any more. Anyway.
You know, I can hear your heartbeat in all of that, and I'm going to get Mike's thoughts here. You've been in the system. There's a little sense in which I can pick up there's confusion. There's all of these things, of course, you have to deal with them. But I've had all of these experiences too. Hey, Mike, what are your thoughts for our caller?
I mean, I just want to say, praise God that he's held you for 83 years. You are right. A lot of our rights have been eroded over many years, and you are right. We need to keep an eye on our leaders, see what they believe, and support for and vote for leaders who uphold the good and suppress the evil, as the Bible would say. So, just bless you.
Yes, it's oppressive, and it's also, listen, please, domestic violence, that is coercive control, and it
Absolutely.
Involves money, and it involves people's lives. And yes, I've had 2 broken marriages, and yes, but all of them came from alcohol. And who's behind money?
You know what? There are a lot of social evils at work in the way that things tend to be so complicated in our lives, and coercive control is everywhere. And we'll often have our own personal definitions of what that coercive control is too. But I want to thank you, our anonymous caller. Appreciate your call. And we're going to take some more calls too. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. You can send us a text too on 0447 488 316. Let's take a call. Richard is in Austinville. Hello, Richard.
G'day, guys. I just wanted to ask a question about... I used to be in YWAM full-time, haven't been for a while, but do you know if they're planning to limit more like evangelism and stuff on the streets in any of this policy? Because I've noticed it has happened in Queensland and a few other states before, but along with freedoms with that sort of thing as well.
Good thoughts there, Richard, because sometimes we talk about a slippery slope. One thing leads to another. Thoughts here, Mike?
Well, this is the danger, that the potential danger in starting to say these groups are cults and these groups aren't cults. If you then declare a group to be a cult, then talking about it, recruiting people, and as you say, street evangelism would be then illegal. So it's really important that we just keep reminding our governments, no, people are allowed to believe a whole range of things, and we're allowed to proclaim it on the streets. We're allowed to teach other people. And if people don't agree with us, well, they just don't have to listen to us. But we don't want to control speech in our protection of people. So yeah, totally. There is no legislation that I'm aware of at the moment that would restrict street preaching, apart from a lot of states have got legislation around abortion clinics, which restrict what you can do in spaces around there. That's the one limitation that I'm aware of, which in itself is a very concerning development.
Richard, anything further to add?
Just one other thing, like through a lot of the stuff with anti-Semitism and what's been happening in, October 7 from a couple of years ago and all of that, there is a push to lift up Islam to give them a greater say over everybody. What's to say that they're not going to legislate Islam as being a religious freedom, but other religions as not being a religious freedom? That is one thing that concerns me.
This is one of those open-ended issues, isn't it? Because religious freedom for Christians means religious freedom for other religions as well. Mike, a thought or two for Richard?
If you're concerned about the rise of Islam, the first most comforting thing is that currently Islam is 2.5% of our population. Christianity is still 50% of our population. As I believe in Australia, if we have got freedom of speech and freedom to preach the gospel, the truth will win. And so we just want to keep a level playing field where all faiths can say what they believe, debate what they believe, and that's preservation of religious freedom. And then I do believe that the Christian faith will win because we hold the truth.
Truth is the issue here. Richard, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316. Send us a text on 0447 488 316. Let's take another call. Barbara in Western Australia. Hey, Barbara. Welcome.
Hi, how are you going?
Doing good. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that, like you said, it's very broad across the board, but I think it's a code of conduct that needs to be addressed from the top to the bottom. So the politicians need to abide by the code of conduct of no coercive control, and if we as a people have to abide by, they have also to abide by the law. And if, like the lady was saying, domestic violence, if that code of conduct comes back to the Bible, it comes back to how we treat each other, and if they take that out, then there'll be no code of conduct.
I think you're absolutely on the money there, Barbara, because we think sometimes the government's got all the answers. They can just legislate all this to happen. But there is a certain sense in which the heart of humanity is an issue here, and that would be why our good news gospel is so important to permeate every element of our society. Mike, your thoughts for Barbara?
Oh, and Barbara, I made that exact point to the Victorian Inquiry. If you're going to legislate about how groups work, you better legislate it for everybody, not just religions. And political part. If you write what's define coercive control so that it limits religions, there's a lot of political parties that aren't going to fare very well under that either. So I agree. Whatever we say, organisations and communities should work. It should be across the board, and it should be based on those fundamentals of we've got to be kind and loving to each other, but we've also got to be free to say things we disagree with.
Barbara, anything quickly further to add?
Yes, because we're all human, we all err. So that's
Yes.
where I think that this code of conduct, because you're talking about euthanasia, but they've cancelled the death penalty, but they're bringing it back.
Yeah, well, that's another way of interpreting things like that, isn't there? Hey, Barbara, I've got a few texts to cover here, and I still want to talk about the religious discrimination bill. But Barbara in WA, thank you so much for a great contribution to our conversation. Hey, let's just touch on a text or two here. Got one from Darren, who says, I have a father in Victoria that's in the process of VAD. He's not a Christian that I know of, unfortunately. He has a large tumour that's growing on the side of his face that cannot be operated on or anything done about it. Also suffering from Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia. I'm not sure about my position on this topic and what the Bible says about this topic. And short of a big study here, how would you sum up here, Mike, a response, thinking about this topic, wondering what God says in the Bible about these things?
As you said, it's very complicated, and when you get to the edges, and like this story, Christians do disagree on exactly where the edges meet, and so I'm not going to say that this is what you should be doing in this situation. Love your father, pray for your father, proclaim the gospel to your father, absolutely. One thing the Bible does say is that Paul gives less interest about what non-Christians do as opposed to what Christians should do. And so I do have a strong view about whether Christians should be involved in themselves in VAD. And that's why we need to be talking about conscientious objection, whether or not it's illegal. Mate, I'll be praying for you. It's a hard time, and it's a hard set of conversations to have. And pray that your father does turn to Jesus.
Thanks so much for the text, Darren. Another text from Trevor in West Swan in WA. I have my own definition of euthanasia: mad medical assisted death. So MAD, medical assisted death, normalised, enforced, sanitised, sacrificed, madness. First we normalise it, then we enforce it, we sanitise the language and sacrifice the inconvenient. Then comes madness. Thought for Trevor?
There's a great quote from Boston Legal when Danny Crane reflects on his. Obviously it's a character, but he reflects on his father's death, and the line he said is, "We didn't put him out of his misery; we put him out of our misery." And sometimes you're right that there is moving out of getting people out of really true pain. But then sometimes we just find the elderly inconvenient, and that is a real fear with VAD. And we've seen that in other countries, that mental health becomes a justification for VAD. I think the whole thing is very, very concerning as a trend, yeah.
Thanks to all those who sent us a text. Hey, just a remaining couple of minutes here. A federal petition that you've got going for the religious discrimination bill. I know you've been working with both sides federally around a religious discrimination bill. Not everyone agrees right now. What's your aspiration here, and how can we make some sort of difference from where we might be sitting right now, Mike?
Well, going into the election, both major parties committed to religious freedom. Labor said they would progress a religious discrimination bill if it was bipartisan with the coalition. The coalition gave strong support for religious freedom in principle. What we haven't done is get both of the parties together, negotiating with faith communities and actually writing a bill that will really protect our religious freedom. So right now, we are running a petition calling on our MPs to get together to negotiate with faith communities to let's actually get this thing done.
All right, if one side of government is strong enough to bulldoze through their own bill on religious discrimination, what would that do? If you don't have different sides agreeing together and saying we want to protect religious freedom, what's the worst case scenario? Can you come up with something for us here?
Well, Labor did commit to no deals with the Greens on this. They said it has to be with the coalition or they'll do nothing. So if they keep their word, then the worst case scenario is nothing happens, which is not great, but it's not terrible. If Labor do create a bill and then bulldoze it through with the Greens, that would be a clear break of an election promise, and we'll take that to the next election and we'll take them on for that. But really what we want them to do is move past the partisan politics and actually work together.
All right, we've been talking about religious freedom, and it's that freedom to believe what you want to believe. As soon as someone legislates that, and you are a Christian, and you're aligning with what you understand as orthodox Christian doctrine and ways that we treat one another and our belief in God, the pursuit of His purposes in time and space, this is the sort of thing you'd be very, very interested in. Religious belief, a foundational human right. And for listeners, on a number of the issues that we've been talking about today, a couple of websites to point you to, contactyourmp.org.au. So if you're in Victoria or in New South Wales, contactyourmp.org.au. There's some things there that you can respond to. I did note there was one text that was down the list that was saying, is there some sort of a template that I need something that's going to help me to be able to contact my MP? Is that sort of thing available, Mike?
Absolutely, and all the email addresses.
So the email address for your local MPs, contactyourmp.org.au. And there's good resource and understanding in a clear way on the Freedom for Faith website, freedomforfaith.org.au. Mike Southon is Executive Director of Freedom for Faith. Mike, I love our conversations. You're wonderful the way that you're able to articulate those things. Not getting too emotive. There was a little emotive section there. We could have gone into all sorts of different directions, but thank you so much for just saying, hey, wait a moment. Cults and coercive control, don't get too emotive around that. It's just an inquiry. No one's committed to do anything, but what we recognise is that there are grounds there where things could go particularly bad. Mike Southon, really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much for sharing those with us today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil. Great to chat.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.